Imagine being invited to your millionaire boss's birthday party, thinking that you will finally be recognized for your hard work. But when you arrive, you realize the intention is to humiliate you in front of everyone. What would you do? Discover how Marla faces this situation with her head held high. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment about this emotional story. When Walter called me to the kitchen that afternoon, I was finishing cleaning the marble floor, a meticulous job that required attention. I heard my name, and at that moment I felt a knot in my stomach. When he was home, he rarely spoke to me. It was always instructions left in notes or orders passed through the housekeeper. But this time there he was, standing in the doorway with a smile that seemed forced. "Marla," he began, and I felt my hands start to sweat. "I want you to come to my birthday party this Saturday night. It will be a grand event, and I think it would be interesting if you were there." At that moment I was speechless. I blinked a few times, trying to understand what he really meant. He spoke slowly, as if he expected me not to understand the words right away. It was an uncomfortable feeling, as if he was testing me. "Of course, Mr. Monroe. If that's what you want," I replied, trying not to let my trembling voice show. He chuckled softly, almost mockingly, and nodded his head. "That's right. Come well dressed, Marla. After all, it's a gala," he said, a peculiar gleam in his eyes. I felt exposed, as if I had just agreed to something dangerous, but before I could ask more, he was already leaving the kitchen, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. In the following days, I couldn't stop thinking about the invitation. Why did he want me to go to the party? Was he finally recognizing me for my work? After all, I had worked for him for over 15 years, keeping the house spotless, often sacrificing my personal time to ensure everything was in order. I never expected thanks, but that invitation felt strange, out of the ordinary. I tried not to let negative thoughts take over, but something inside me told me it wasn't just kindness. That night I called my daughter Lisa. "You won't believe what happened," I said, trying to hide the anxiety in my voice. I told her about the invitation, hoping she would say something that made sense. Lisa, on the other end of the line, was excited. "Mom, that's amazing. He finally noticed how hard you work. You have to go?" I wanted to believe her enthusiasm, but something still held me back. I also talked to my friend Amelia, who always had sensible advice. She listened patiently and then paused before answering. "If you feel like there's something behind this, Marla, go with caution. But I think you should go, yes. Just to show that you're not afraid of anything." Her words gave me a bit of courage. She was right. I couldn't let fear control me. The next few days were spent trying to find the right dress. My savings weren't much, so I had to choose carefully. I went to a neighborhood store and bought a simple, elegant blue dress. It wasn't extravagant, but it made me feel beautiful in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. When I tried it on at home for the first time, Lisa helped me adjust the hem, and for a moment I managed to forget the doubts and allow myself a smile in the mirror. It was as if, for a few seconds, I was stepping into a different world where people would look at me as an equal. The night before the party, I couldn't sleep properly. Every hour, I looked at the clock, wondering if I was doing the right thing. When morning finally arrived, Walter's house was quiet, as if the mansion were holding its breath along with me. I had finished my tasks early to get ready, and by around 7 in the evening I put on the dress, fixed my hair, and applied a light lipstick, something discreet that fit what I could afford. I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. A part of me wanted to give up, come up with some excuse, but I knew I had passed the point of no return. With a deep sigh, I grabbed my purse and prepared to leave. Before leaving the house, I sent a message to Lisa. "I'm on my way. Pray for me." She responded almost instantly with a heart emoji and a short phrase that gave me a bit of strength. "You can do it, Mom." I was trying to convince myself that I could. That this was just a silly paranoia. As I drove toward Walter's mansion that night, the city streets seemed empty and cold, illuminated only by the headlights of my car and the flickering streetlights. There was a weight in the air, something I couldn't explain, but it followed me with every kilometer. Deep down, I still hoped Lisa was right, that this party was somehow a chance for recognition. But the doubt remained, like a shadow that refused to leave. Finally, I arrived at the main gate of the mansion, which was lit up like a palace. A row of expensive cars lined up in front of the entrance, and I felt small in front of that scene. I handed my invitation to the doorman, who looked at me for a moment before nodding and opening the iron gate. I took a deep breath and took my first step, crossing the entrance like someone stepping across an invisible line between two worlds, mine and his. The uncertainty and suspicions grow with every step, but Marla tries to maintain her confidence and dignity. The party is just beginning, and the real reason behind the invitation is still a mystery. On Saturday, the afternoon dragged on in a mix of nervousness and expectation. As I adjusted the dress on my body, I smoothed the folds of fabric with trembling fingers. Lisa had sent me a message wishing me good luck, and at that moment, I felt an inner strength that I needed to cling to with all my might. I took a deep breath and looked in the mirror. I was simple but dignified. The blue dress, my hair elegantly tied up, a touch of pink lipstick. I wanted to feel beautiful and confident, even if only for myself. Driving to Walter's mansion felt like crossing a line that separated two worlds. As soon as I passed through the gates, a sense of unreality enveloped me. The mansion was absurdly illuminated, with golden and white lights hanging from every corner. People in long dresses and tuxedos walked through the gardens as if they had stepped out of one of those movies I used to watch on Saturday nights with Lisa. I parked my car next to a row of luxurious vehicles that made my old sedan look like a relic. I took a deep breath before getting out and handing the keys to the valet, who gave me a condescending look before averting his gaze. As I climbed the steps to the main entrance, I felt each of my steps echo like a declaration that I didn't belong there. My low-heeled shoes seemed out of place on the polished marble floor. The door was opened by one of Walter's servants, who merely nodded silently upon seeing me. The foyer was crowded with guests, all laughing and talking, their clothes and jewelry gleaming under the soft light of the crystal chandeliers. I smiled politely, trying to blend in, but the surprised and disdainful looks started to pile up on me like a heavy cloak. That's when I spotted Walter. He was in the center of the room, surrounded by a group of rich and influential people, a glass of champagne in hand. When he saw me, he opened that wide smile and walked towards me. I felt trapped, as if there was nowhere to escape. "Marla," he exclaimed, raising his glass as if to toast my arrival. "You look different." For a moment, my heart raced and I didn't know how to respond. There was something in his tone that bothered me, but I smiled, albeit restrained. "Thank you, Mr. Monroe," I replied, trying to keep my composure. He didn't stop staring at me as if he were enjoying my discomfort. I noticed his eyes critically scanning my dress, my hair, as if evaluating every detail. "I hope you're enjoying the party," he said without expecting an answer, and then returned to his circle of friends, leaving me alone again. I tried to find a corner where I could hide, but every movement seemed to draw more attention. My steps were cautious, trying to avoid bumping into conversations and disdainful looks. I stood by the drinks table for a few minutes, trying to regain my composure, but no one spoke to me. The conversations continued as if I weren't there, muffled voices and laughter that made me feel small. I picked up a glass of champagne, more to have something in my hands than out of a desire to drink, and started walking through the hall, observing every detail of the luxurious decor. I wanted to distract myself, but it was impossible. It was then that Walter reappeared by my side, almost as if he knew I was vulnerable. "Tell me, Marla," he began in an exaggeratedly friendly tone that only made the situation more awkward, "how do you manage to keep my house so immaculate? It must be exhausting work, don't you think?" I felt my face flush but forced a smile. "It's a job I do with dedication, sir. And I'm used to it." I knew he was putting me in an uncomfortable position on purpose, but I refused to give him the pleasure of seeing me shaken. He let out a light laugh, and the way the guests around him watched us made me feel like a circus animal on display. "I imagine," he said with a nearly cruel gleam in his eyes. It was clear he wanted me to feel out of place, that every word of his was calculated to remind me of my place. "It must be tiring cleaning all those windows and floors every day." "It's my job," I replied firmly. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, and he seemed to enjoy it. I knew he was trying to humiliate me, but I refused to look away. The discomfort only grew as the night went on. Every conversation I tried to start felt like talking to walls. Short responses, fake smiles, eyes that diverted. It was as if I were surrounded by an invisible barrier that isolated me from others, a barrier I couldn't cross. I returned to the drinks table, now with the empty glass in my hands, and wondered why I had accepted the invitation. I wanted to leave, but I knew that if I did, I would be giving in to his game. It was then that I saw Clarice, an old school friend of Lisa's, who now worked as Walter's assistant. She saw me and, for a moment, it seemed like she was going to approach, but hesitated. Her gaze was quickly caught by Walter's, who seemed to be watching every movement of mine with a morbid interest. Clarice averted her gaze, pretending she hadn't seen me, and walked away. I felt a wave of shame and despair, as if all my past were exposed for everyone to see. The hours passed slowly, each minute dragging on while I pretended to enjoy the party. I smiled when they expected a smile, thanked the condescending comments, but inside I felt a mix of anger and humiliation. I wanted to confront Walter, tell him that no matter how hard he tried, I wasn't going to break. But I knew that was exactly what he wanted to see me break. And I wouldn't give him that pleasure. However, as I continued in that room full of luxury, my sense of indignation grew. Something inside me ignited, a fire I didn't know existed. I was there for a reason, and even though I still didn't know what it was, I knew I needed to find out. The discomfort grows with every interaction, and Marla feels increasingly pressured. The tension between her and Walter is subtle but present, as she tries to understand the true intentions behind that invitation. I stood there, frozen, as Walter continued his speech. Each word he said seemed to hit a part of me that I had carefully guarded. The insecurities, the sacrifices, the quiet pride in my work. He spoke with a smile on his face, that smile everyone else seemed to imitate as they nodded in approval. As if my effort, my dedication, were some sort of spectacle for his amusement. Marla is the type of person who really goes above and beyond, he said, his voice echoing through the hall. I mean, think about it, she has to clean a house this big all by herself, and still she does it with a smile on her face. A murmur of suppressed laughter rose from the audience, as if he were telling an inside joke of which I was the only one not a part. Isn't that inspiring? I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that yes, I cleaned that house, but not for pleasure, but because it was my job, because I needed that money to support my family. Each laugh I heard seemed to squeeze my heart. Each glance that crossed mine was a mixture of pity and disdain. The people around me were smiling, toasting, as if I were a story of overcoming, something to admire from afar, but never to be a part of. When he finally finished the speech, there was a round of polite applause. I felt ashamed, trapped in a whirlwind of emotions: anger, humiliation, sadness. I wanted to run, but I also knew that if I did, I would be giving him the victory he so wanted. So, I stayed where I was, forcing a smile as he came toward me, a glass of champagne in hand. I hope you didn't mind, Marla, he said with a malicious gleam in his eyes. I thought it would be important for everyone to know how special you are to me. Of course, Mr. Monroe, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, but feeling my throat close up. Thank you for the words. He smiled again, satisfied. It was clear that for him that had all been just a game. But for me it was something much more serious. It was my dignity that was at stake, and I refused to let it slip through my fingers. With what little strength I had left, I took a step back, took a deep breath, and returned to the farthest corner of the hall. I needed air. I needed to leave before the tears started to roll. As I walked away, I heard some muffled conversations. Murmurs from guests commenting on the speech, whispered laughter about the humble Marla. Every word seemed to chase me, following me through the hall. I found a darker corner near an open window and stood there, trying to control my breathing. The night was beautiful outside, but I couldn't appreciate anything. Everything felt wrong, distorted. It was as if I were watching an endless nightmare. Then I felt a hand lightly touch my arm. It was Clarice, Walter's assistant, with eyes full of pity. Marla, are you okay? She asked, but her tone was hesitant, as if she were afraid of actually wanting to hear the answer. I smiled, an empty smile, and nodded. I'm fine, Clarice. Don't worry. It was a beautiful speech, she said, but there was something in her voice that sounded false, as if she also knew it was all a big lie. Walter is, He can be a bit sarcastic sometimes. I know, I replied, and this time my voice came out firm. But I'm fine. What else could I say? There was no room for venting at that party, let alone for the truth. Clarice hesitated for a moment as if she wanted to say something else, but when she looked toward the group of guests, she simply gave a forced smile and walked away. I felt a void growing inside me, a loneliness I hadn't felt in years. All I wanted was to disappear. Breathe deeply, leave that suffocating environment, run away from the condescending words and the burning looks. I returned to the hall, but this time I didn't try to blend in. I kept myself on the outskirts, observing the party with a distant gaze. It was as if I were floating, detached from the world around me, trapped in a bubble where no one could truly see me. The laughter continued, conversations were lively, glasses clinked in toasts that seemed to echo in my head. Walter reappeared at one point with a sharp smile. "I hope you're enjoying yourself, Marla. I hope you liked my little tribute." "Yes, Mr. Monroe," I said, trying to keep my composure. "It was unforgettable." He laughed, satisfied with the response he had been expecting. "I knew you'd understand. You've always been so professional, Marla. That's why I enjoy having you around so much." I smiled again, but inside, the anger burned like a flame. I knew he was testing me, challenging me to react, to break the mask of servitude he expected me to keep. But no, I wouldn't break. Not there, not in that way. Time seemed to drag on, each minute lasting an eternity as the party went on. People came and went, greeting Walter, congratulating him, but no one looked at me. I was just an invisible presence, a ghost on the edge of his perfect world. When the music began to play, I felt the hall fill with life again, but that life wasn't for me. I was just there as a spectator, someone who had been brought to that moment only to be humiliated and despised. I wanted to leave, I wanted to run far away from that mansion, but I knew that would mean giving in to that cruel game. I knew I had something to face, something that wasn't clear yet, but that burned inside me like a promise of change. And despite everything, I was determined to figure out what it was. That was the moment when time seemed to stop. The lights in the room, the stifled laughter of the guests, the clinking of champagne glasses, everything disappeared. There was only me, my daughter, and Walter with that frozen, surprised smile. Lisa was by my side, her face red with anger, and her eyes shining with a determination I had never seen before. "Do you think this is funny?" Lisa repeated, her strong voice cutting through the heavy silence in the room. "Do you think you can treat people like they're less than you just because you have money? My mom deserves respect, and you have no right to humiliate her." Her voice trembled with emotion, and I saw the guests exchanging confused looks, trying to understand what was happening. Walter opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him a chance. I felt a heat rising in my chest, something coming from an old pain, from all the years I had forced myself to be invisible, to accept what I was given without contesting. I felt my body tremble with adrenaline, and before I could think, the words began to come out. "I've worked in this house for years, Mr. Monroe," I said, my voice becoming firmer with each sentence. "I cleaned every corner, took care of every detail so everything would be perfect for you and your guests. I'm not ashamed of my work because it's my work that's given me everything I have, that allowed me to raise my daughter, keep a roof over our heads. But that doesn't give you the right to use me as if I were part of a display, to entertain your friends or make yourself feel superior." My voice echoed through the hall, each word carrying something I barely knew existed inside me. Walter looked stunned, as if he hadn't expected me to have the courage to confront him. I continued, not stopping to breathe, as if all those words had been waiting years to be spoken. "I am more than the woman who cleans your floors," I said, feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders. "And I don't need your validation to know that. What I do has value, and who I am is so much more than you'll ever understand." The silence in the hall became unbearable. Walter was pale, his mouth opening and closing without sound, as if he didn't know what to say. For the first time he seemed small, vulnerable in front of me. I was shaking, but it wasn't fear. It was relief, a strength that grew with each passing second. Lisa squeezed my hand, and I felt the warmth of her presence by my side. When I looked at her, I saw tears running down her face, but they were tears of pride, not shame. That gave me the courage to take the final step. "You," I said, pointing to the guests who were looking at me with wide eyes. "You think you're better because you have money, because you live in a world where people like me are invisible, but that's not true. The work I do, the things I've achieved, those are the things that matter. Not what you think of me." There was a movement in the crowd as if someone was trying to leave, but I didn't stop. I was living the most important moment of my life and nothing would stop me. "It's easy to judge someone by their appearance or profession," I continued, feeling my voice gain an almost serene tone, "but the truth is we all have struggles, we all have stories no one knows. What defines me is not what I do but how I do it. And I do it with dignity, with pride. Things money can't buy." Suddenly, a woman who was closer to me, who I knew was one of Walter's rich friends, started clapping. It was a hesitant clap at first, but soon others began to join in, until the entire hall was filled with applause. It wasn't warm applause, but I could see that some people were really listening to me, really understanding. Walter, unable to withstand the pressure, dropped the microphone and walked away without a word. He disappeared into the crowd of guests who were still clapping, some out of convenience, others with genuine admiration. I stood there, breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. Lisa turned to me, a relieved and proud smile on her face. "You were amazing, Mom," she whispered, hugging me tightly. And at that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, I had already won. Not because of what I had said, but because, finally, I had found my own voice. We left the room together, hand in hand, as the guests continued to murmur. Some people looked at us with sympathy, others turned their eyes away, not knowing what to do or say. The party went on, but for me, everything had changed. I was no longer the invisible woman who accepted everything in silence. I was Marla and I had spoken. As we passed through the door, I felt the cool breeze of the night on my face, and it was as if the weight of years was being pulled off me. Lisa looked at me and smiled, and I knew she understood what that meant. I was no longer alone in the fight to be respected, to be heard. I had myself and I had my daughter, who had become as strong as I had always wanted to be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that we were free. The next day, the phone rang early in the morning. It was Walter. He didn't give me a chance to ask any questions. He just said, with that cold, distant voice he used when he wanted to make something seem irrelevant, "Marla, we need to talk. I've decided we no longer need your services. I appreciate the time you've worked here, but it's better if we go our separate ways." He could barely hide the relief in his voice. I knew he was waiting for me to react, to beg him to stay, as I had always done with other things in life. But I didn't do that. I didn't cry, I didn't feel guilty. I had already made a decision and it didn't shake me anymore. When he finished, the only thing I said was, "All right, Walter. Keep your house and keep your lie. I know what I am." I hung up the phone, and for a moment I stood there, motionless, feeling the emptiness of those words. I was free. Not free from the struggle, not free from the challenges that would still come, but free from the shame he had tried to impose on me. I would never again be the person who lowered her head, who accepted being treated as less. I had found something more valuable, the certainty that I deserved respect. Lisa was in the kitchen, watching me with eyes still shining with pride. She gave me a wide smile and simply said, "You did the right thing, Mom." And while I knew she understood the importance of that moment, I also knew she was still too young to fully grasp the magnitude of the transformation that had taken place inside me. In the following days, I made a decision that seemed like a natural extension of my journey. I would start working for myself. Amelia helped me, offering a few contacts and giving me initial support to get my first clients. At first, it was difficult, of course. The fears of the past, the doubts, the insecurities, still came to the surface. But the feeling of freedom, of being able to decide my own path, gave me the strength to keep going. I started offering domestic services in a way I never thought would be possible. Not just to pay the bills or survive, but with dignity, with a new understanding of my worth. Every house I entered, every client who received me, I knew I was more than just a maid. I was a woman with a purpose, with a story, and the respect I received now was not given out of pity or compassion, but by merit. Walter? I didn't know anything about him anymore. And honestly, I didn't want to know. What he did or didn't do was irrelevant to me. He no longer had power over my life, no longer had the ability to define me. And that, in itself, was the greatest victory I could have had. There were difficult moments, of course, when money was tight or when the bills piled up faster than I would have liked. But those were the challenges of life, challenges anyone would face, no matter their social class, color, or past. Deep down, I knew these moments didn't define me, nor did they make me less than anyone. They just tested my determination. The first time I landed a house to clean on my own, without Walter or any other figure putting me in a subordinate position, I felt a wave of gratitude. The feeling of being in control of my life, of deciding what was worth it, made me realize how much I had grown since that night. Lisa continued to be by my side more than just my daughter. She became a friend, someone who understood me and supported me in every decision. And over time she learned to see the world in a more critical, more empathetic and fairer way. I didn't know exactly what the future held for us, but I knew I would no longer be afraid. And from time to time, in moments of quiet reflection, I thought about that party, about Walter's speech, the humiliation he tried to inflict on me, and the way for the first time I stood up and said, "Enough." It wasn't just about him or the party. It was about my life, about the respect we all deserve, no matter what we do or where we come from. In the end, life wasn't about accepting what others said we were. It was about finally understanding what we ourselves believed we were. And in that moment, I knew without a doubt that my worth didn't come from a luxurious house or a prestigious position. It came from within, from my courage to change, to speak out, and to never again allow anyone to treat me as if I were less. When Lisa and I sat at the table for dinner, laughing and telling stories about the day, I knew that our journey was just beginning. The difficulties undoubtedly would come, but now, with dignity, with our own voice, and with the respect we deserved, we would face the world with our heads held high. I was Marla, and I would never let anyone tell me what I was worth.